I wasn't getting out of bed.
I wasn't going to work.
I hid my problems from everyone.
I didn't want people to judge me.
I watched my daughter suffering.
I didn't know what to do.
Because you joined the conversation, we know we are not alone.
We are not weak.
We are not ashamed.
We are strong.
And help is out there. We need to ask for it. Join the conversation. Visit letstalkstigma.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Smith, board member of the Anti-Stigma Coalition, and on behalf of all of us, I'd like to welcome you to the latest in our series of Facebook Live events. This time, we are focusing on the state of stigma, dealing with grief and loss. When you lose somebody in your life, the feelings of grief can be overwhelming. Whether that loss is personal or one suffered as a community, it can sometimes be difficult to figure out how you are supposed to feel. For some of us, it could be a long, uncharted journey that can be difficult to navigate. What can be done to help people on their journeys of grief and loss? Does stigma play a role in how people seek or don't seek out help? Today, our panelists will explore these and other related questions. Before I introduce our panelists, here are a couple of housekeeping items. Our program is for 1 hour. During this time, if you have a question or comment, please type it into the chat box and we'll respond accordingly. Your questions often lead to some great dialogue, so please don't be shy. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our panelists for this time. Caroline Fulkerson. Caroline is a spiritual care counselor for Hospice Buffalo. She was trained as a chaplain through the Clinical Pastoral Education Program at Sisters Hospital of Buffalo. Her final project for the training was provider bias/stigma toward patients with substance use disorder and the role of spiritual care in recovery. She's a graduate of SUNY College at Buffalo and is pursuing a Master's of Pastoral Studies at St. Bernard's School of Theology and Ministry in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our panel, Caroline.
Thank you.
Carol Doggett. Until very recently, Carol was the Senior Director of Marketing, Communications, and Outreach for Mental Health Advocates of Western New York. During her 8 years in MHA, she developed and oversaw the public awareness campaign, Just Tell One, designed to give Western New York youth and young adults the tools and confidence to start the conversation about their mental health and behavioral health issues and connect with a trusted person. The campaign boasts more than 5 million views of its peer video messages, over 100,000 visitors to its website, and more than 320,000 engaged social media users. As an extension of the campaign, she also developed the Just Tell One discussion guide program for students now being taught in schools throughout Western New York. Dealing with the many challenges of caring for a family member with a mental health diagnosis, more than once she turned to MHA for help and support. In 2016, she had the opportunity to return that support using her professional skills to help others by joining the MHA staff. Prior to joining MHA, for 22 years, she owned Video Resource Associates, an award-winning video multimedia production company specializing in corporate communications, where she successfully acquired and maintained a long-term national and international client base. Early in her career, she worked extensively in public relations for several nonprofit organizations and advertising firms. Ms. Doggett is a founding member of the Anti-Stigma Coalition, serving as its project manager and treasurer. Thanks so much for being with us, Carol.
Thank you.
Next up is Carl Shallowhorn. Carl Shallowhorn is the Director of Youth Programs for Mental Health Advocates of Western New York and the host of Mindful Music, which is heard on 88.7 WBFO-FM, Buffalo's NPR affiliate. He has a master's degree in student personnel administration from SUNY Buffalo State and has worked in the field of behavioral health for over 20 years. He's the vice chair of the Mental Health Association New York State Board of Directors. Carl is the author of Working on Wellness, a practical guide to mental health and leadership through the lens of the 12 steps. He's a contributing writer for BP Magazine and has received numerous awards, including from the Buffalo chapter of the National Federation for Just Communities and the Buffalo Association of Black Social Workers. Carl has been selected for inclusion in the 2023 Marquee Who's Who in America. He has delivered hundreds of workshops and trainings focusing on mental health and was a featured speaker for TEDx Buffalo in 2021, with his topic being African-American men and mental health. Carl is the featured mental health professional in the TV docuseries Reversed and is a person in long-term recovery from co-occurring bipolar disorder and addiction. Carl is also former chair of the Anti-Stigma Coalition and is often seen moderating panel discussions just like this one. Thanks for agreeing to be on the other side of this one, Carl.
Thank you, Matt.
So welcome again to all of our panelists, and thank you for joining us today and lending your voices to our important topic. let's start by hearing about everybody's organizations. Caroline, we've all heard of hospice, but what exactly does it do, and what do you do in your role?
Well, hospice is actually hospice and palliative care, Buffalo. Hospice care is end of life care for patients and their families. Palliative care is care for symptoms of serious illness. I work on the hospice side. And the support that we give, I like to say that it's a holistic approach. So you've got your doctors and your nurses taking care of the patient's physical symptoms, making sure they're comfortable. That's our main goal is comfort care. But we know that there's a lot of emotional issues that go on as a person is approaching end of life for them, for their family, for their friends. And so as a spiritual care counselor, my role is to be human to human with them, basically. Feelings, emotions. It's not always religious, spiritual. We all have a spiritual side, whether we're religious or not. But where are you finding strength? How are you coping? And then if there's a religious side to it, sometimes there's an issue with the religion. Sometimes people don't feel like they're forgiven or whatever. And so my job is to help navigate them through the human emotional side of end of life.
Thank you, Caroline. I really appreciate that. Now, Carol Doggett, I know you've just recently left Mental Health Advocates, but I'd love to hear just a quick plug on what exactly it is MHA does.
Well, MHA does a lot of things, to be honest with you. The main mission of Mental Health Advocates is to support those who are living with mental health diagnosis. And you know what? I've already switched jobs, so you caught me off guard here. Well, let's go. Carl, why don't you do that? I don't feel right talking about MHA at the moment.
That's okay. Well, I'll talk about MHA. So basically, we provide a lot of core services to the community that essentially are able to provide information resources on where people might need to go to get help. We have, for instance, information referral where people can contact us if they're in need of professional services, treatment, support groups. We have CASA, which is court-appointed special advocates, which works with youth in the family court system. We have the BEST program, basic emotional skills training for children grades pre-K through 2. We have educators that go into schools. We have the family support program and the youth support program, youth peer program, both of which work with youth and parents and adults living with mental challenges. We have also the legal services department that provides free legal services to individuals who live with mental challenges, and then also Operation Calm, children of the military. So that program works with children who might have a family member that may be deployed or a family member that may be active duty military, or even veterans who are able to connect and have experience with other children that might be in a similar situation that might not have friends who can identify with that. So,
yeah, that was all great, Carl. But one thing I really would like to add, and I think I've spoken with you about before, is my original connection with MHA is because I needed help as a caretaker. And one of the key things that MHA does is helps families navigate the mental health care delivery system. With our INR, Carl mentioned our INR. If you call MHA, you get a live person, and they will help you find a provider. They will help you find housing. They will help you find legal services. Many times when an individual or a family is suffering, they've either have tried to turn everywhere with no success, or they just don't know where else to go. And that's really the primary benefit to MHA, is they are there with a live person on the other side of the phone who can help you navigate the mental health care system. And then subsequently, all of our programs help support that.
A wonderful, important work, and thank you both for your explanation there. Now, both of you are involved with the Anti-Stigma Coalition. Carl, you were actually a chair at one point of the Anti-Stigma Coalition. Can we just let everybody quickly know exactly what we're all about?
Sure. So the Erie County Anti-Stigma Coalition was formed by 16 founding organizations and members. Our whole purpose is to eliminate stigma associated with mental illness. And we've done this through a number of means, through media programming, through social media, TV media, billboards. And our tagline is join the conversation. We have our website at letstalkstigma.org. We have organizational members, organizations and businesses and schools and nonprofits around the West York area that have essentially signed on to support us and also to encourage not only their staff but others to, like I said, take the pledge to end stigma. The goal is to help people understand that there are a lot of myths around mental health that we need to address, but it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to talk in a way that it normalizes this thing, which many times is hidden, buried, which is where the stigma comes from.
And I'd like to add that one thing we definitely know is stigma is one of the hugest barriers to people receiving treatment. And that's one of the things that the Anti-Stigma Coalition really wants to eliminate. Why they want to eliminate stigma is because we want people to get the treatment that they need. The sooner, the better.
Right. And of course, the recurring theme that permeates everything we do is about talking and not being afraid to talk frankly and openly about these issues. And these Facebook Lives that we do regularly are part of that way that we continue to talk. We're here today to talk about grief and loss. And just about everyone has lost someone in their lives at some point. But Carol, I'd like you to please start us off, because over the last 10 years, you lost your father, your husband, and most recently, your 99 years young mother. You also lost a business in that same time. Would you please share a little bit about your experience?
I'm glad I'm hopefully coming out of the other side. But one thing that I've learned with grief, not only going through it, but also writing quite a bit about it through my job at MHA over the years, is it's not a linear process. And you think you're through it and something will come up and trigger you. I've had slightly different losses in each instance. My father died very suddenly in his sleep. 3 weeks before his 85th birthday, we were planning a big party, and it would just shocked all of us. My husband had a very long, drawn-out illness that was very progressive. It was not a very pleasant death. And so, I had years of that anticipatory grief because not only was my life changing and shattering, but you really didn't know how it was going to end. You just knew it wasn't going to end well. And in that time, I lost my business. So it was my identity for 22 years. So that was another grieving process without having the time to really deal with that grief. My coping method is to plow through. I have a lot of British heritage, stay calm and keep plugging. And that's how I coped. And with my mother was, very mentally active and intact till her very last moment. But, her body was giving out. And I lived about 1,000 miles from her. So the last 2 years of her life was mostly COVID. So I really didn't get to see her, but I spoke with her every day, and I could hear in her voice the changes, that her body was giving out. And so that was a different type of anticipatory grief, because I knew that part of my family life was really ending, and dealing with that and knowing that, my career was going to be changing soon. There was a lot of, uncertainty as to how I would deal with life. And now I'm at that point in the process where I have to rediscover who I am and who I want to be for the rest of my life. So that's a little bit of the history.
Well, thank you for that background. Carl, I know you've experienced some losses too and have some issues that are ongoing. If you're comfortable, would you share a little bit about what you've been going through or have gone through?
Sure. The first significant loss I had was my mother. Well, one of the most significant. I lost grandparents and so forth before, but the one that really stands out, the first one, was when my mother, passed away in 1996, and I had received a call on Memorial Day from my father saying that my mother had been taken to the hospital. This was early in the morning, and they lived close to the VA. So he's not a veteran, but it was the closest hospital that the paramedics could get her to. And yeah, I remember going to see her. She was on life support, and I remember walking in and seeing her connected to this machine, and it was overwhelming. I mean, it was just I can actually sort of like visualize in my mind right now that it was just the kind of thing that yeah, you can't prepare yourself for that. And so we knew that there would be no coming back. I mean, she was without oxygen for nearly 10 minutes. They resuscitated her, but there was no brain activity. So we had to wait, though, however, several days. So my brother, my uncle, came from out of town, and that's that was also the hard part. That's a different kind of anticipatory grief where at some point that you will literally have to remove your loved one from that life-sustaining device, and then they will transition. And the saddest thing for me though was that we made that decision and it was done. However, she passed in the middle of the night. In other words, there was no one with her when she died. My father, on the other hand, was similar as to what Carol said. He had a very slow, progressive illness called supranuclear palsy. And it really took a matter of almost a few years, very slow, degenerative disease that eventually took away his functioning. He developed dementia. And he was also, blind. It was a very horrible experience. And I was working at the MHA at the time, and it was really difficult because there's this term we call presenteeism, where you're in a place, but you're not thinking about where you're at. You're somewhere else, and that was how I spent a lot of my days during that time when I was having to go to the skilled nursing facility where he was at nearby to visit, would be on my lunch hour after work. And so as we progressed along, though, I'll just add this piece that my dad loved jazz. He was a huge jazz lover, and this is before Spotify became a thing. So I would go into skilled nursing, residence he lived in, and I would play YouTube videos, jazz videos for him. And he, even though he wouldn't respond, I mean, I just knew he would be hearing it. But that's what I also did when his last couple of days. I received a call that basically it was about that time. So myself, my wife, and my cousin and my aunt went in there, and I just put the phone by his ear and kept playing jazz. And it was a really sacred moment because I was with him when he passed away, and he was listening to John Coltrane. Coltrane played the blues, and that was, I think, for me special because from what I've learned is that our hearing is the last thing to go, but also I gained a sense of appreciation that it was something that I hope was a comfort, being able to hear music that he loved and might have helped guide him. And that's my belief. So it was a very sacred moment in that respect.
I know both of you talked a little bit about anticipatory grief as part of what you've experienced, and how has your experience, do you think, shaped how you handle things that are coming your way now?
If I can say, I'm dealing with it right now with a dear friend, probably one of my very dearest friends, who is facing something, a terminal illness that has really changed my own perspective on life. Really, I do recognize how precious life is and how life can change, in a heartbeat, in a second. And so it's given me a new appreciation for life, but also how to walk with that person in the journey of having terminal illness and being there, being present, being a friend, and being supportive in a way that is essentially allowing them to feel what they're feeling and to be present. That's the main thing, to be present and to do whatever I can to help. And I've had waves of emotion around that and feelings. And it's not going to be easy because this is a terminal illness that is not an easy one to go through with someone. I just hope I can be there for him, the best way I can.
Thanks for all that, Carl. I appreciate it. Caroline, obviously you've been around a lot of grief and a lot of loss throughout your career. Are there some general words of advice? I mean, especially as you hear these stories from Carol and Carl, that you might have for people about handling losses like these? I think you're muted, Caroline.
Oh dear, I'm one of those.
Not to worry.
I think Carol's point that grief is not linear is very important. It can sneak up on you. I think the most important thing is to let yourself feel. I think, don't be afraid to feel. A lot of people, they don't want to cry. They don't want to cry in front of other people. They feel they need to be strong for other people. And I tell people, you can be weak. You could cry. It's okay. And it's part of your humanity. And I remember when my father died, someone telling me to be strong, and he had been ill for a few months. And I remember thinking, I've been strong for the past 3 months, dealing with his decline, dealing with the system, dealing with the nursing home, dealing with the in and out of rehab. And is he getting better? Is he not getting better? How do I manage his affairs? How do I manage my mother? I have been strong. Now it's my turn to not be strong. Now I'm just going to let it out. And so there's obviously a balance there, but I think that's important to let people know it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel, and not to compare yourselves to how others are handling their grief, because everybody's different.
Yeah.
You mentioned, go ahead, Carol.
Well, I also wanted to add to that, in the 3 instances in my life, my reaction to the deaths were all very different. They weren't the same. When my father died, I was really quite angry at him because we had this party planned, and how dare him die? And I had plane tickets, and this was supposed to be a surprise, and we didn't do a lot of surprise things in my family, and it was going to be a big deal. And he died, and I was really pissed, to be honest with you. When my husband died, similar to what Caroline just said, it was an ordeal for years. It was horrible. And it was relief. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to tell people you're relieved because it's over. Now, years, as time passed, those feelings changed. But the initial response was, finally, I don't have to worry when I open the door, am I going to find somebody dead on the other side? That's the type of situation it was. And when my mom died, just sadness, and still sadness. It's been a year, and because she was there every day for me, even if it's just on the phone. So grief comes in different packages. Not only is it non-linear, but you're not going to feel the same with every loss in your life.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Carol, very much. One thing that occurred to me is Caroline was mentioning some of the ceremonial things that we do when a person passes on, and some of those social kinds of, requirements that we might have. Any thoughts on those? It's sometimes wonder about the pressures that a person might feel if you got to deal with, a wake or a viewing or a funeral or things along those lines. Anything to talk about that?
It's interesting. I have to just share a personal experience I had last night. Not for me personally, but for another friend. His mother unfortunately died on Mother's Day. She was on life support, and it was a situation where they were waiting for a family member to come in from out of town, like what's in my case. And he's Jewish, and so they had the funeral service right away on Monday, and then they had Shiva. And I went last night, and there was the prayer service. I don't think I'd ever been to a Shiva prayer service, and I found it to be beautiful. The ritual, the prayer, the coming together of family and friends to celebrate and to remember the person. And of course, most faith traditions, in terms of just generally faith traditions, have that kind of ritual associated with it. And of course, with my own parents, they belonged to the same church. So, we had that. We did that where we had a funeral. In fact, when my father died, I was working at MHA and also another position at Compeer, a share position, and people came from work. I will never forget that people came to that service, and it meant the world to me that my colleagues were kind enough to come and be there when when I needed it. So that was beautiful.
Thank you, Carl.
When my mom died, it was during COVID, and I have 9 brothers and sisters, and most of them couldn't come into town, and not a lot of people came to the wake or the funeral. But what we did was we set up Zoom at the funeral home.
Mm-hmm.
And my brothers and sisters were on, and other relatives from all over the country, and then we could interact on Zoom with people that maybe normally would have been able to come but weren't. It was beautiful. It was a good way to do it. Didn't get the hugs, but you got the love.
Yeah. I'd like to add to what Carl said. I remember when my husband passed, and we're talking about stigma. So my husband had a lot of diagnoses, most of which were mental health related, and it was a long illness. So the isolation, he didn't have a lot of friends anymore. He didn't, we didn't have family nearby. You as a caretaker become isolated when you're dealing with it on a full-time basis. We didn't have a big funeral per se, but we had a celebration of life. And like Carl, I was stunned of, I was self-employed for so many years. I had so many vendors and so many suppliers, and they were the ones who came. People who I had dealt with on a professional level for years and years and years, they showed up to support me. And that was, there was really hardly anybody there, not even his own brother, came. They had a separate celebration in Cleveland for him, his high school friends and the like. But it's very important when the people who are left behind get support.
I think that's quite true. I think we often hear about the being for the living, when we have these ceremonies and things. And I do remember as a younger man, often being hesitant to go to such things. And my mother always telling me, you have to go or otherwise no one will come to yours. So.
Well, and the other thing is not to be afraid of other people's feelings, right? Not to be afraid of the grief, not to be afraid of the tears. Oftentimes people, they don't know what to say. And so then they'll say things like, oh, you'll find someone else, or he's in a better place, things that aren't necessarily appropriate at that time. But oftentimes what people need, and what, I remember in my very first training and the chaplaincy, was told, listen. All people just need you to listen. They just need a listening ear and a hug. And I'm here with you. What do you need?
Thank you. For those of you that are just joining us, I'm Matt Smith from the Erie County Anti-Stigma Coalition, and I'm joined by Caroline Fulkerson, a spiritual care counselor with Hospice Buffalo, along with Carol Doggett of the Anti-Stigma Coalition, and Carl Shallowhorn, also of the Anti-Stigma Coalition and Mental Health Advocates of Western New York. We've been discussing grief and loss, and we'll be talking even more about the role of stigma as an impediment to dealing with these challenges soon. Everyone joining us, please do take a minute and check out our website, letstalkstigma.org, and maybe join the nearly 4,000 others who have already taken the pledge to end stigma. Also, if you're connected with a business, organization, or faith community, you can become an organizational member of the Anti-Stigma Coalition. You can find information for this on the website under the members tab. So please do take advantage of that, and please join us in our cause of ending stigma around mental illness and mental health issues. Now back to our panel. Question just came in on the chat. And by all means, anyone that's watching this right now, please do ask any questions and we'll get to them in due course. But the question just came in: how can you differentiate between regular grief, which is obviously like a natural thing when we suffer loss, and when it's overwhelming your life? At what point is it necessary? Do we think that getting help would be the right answer? Anyone want to comment on that?
Regular grief, I don't want to use the word it dissipates, but it can fade into the background. You can get on with your life. Yes, you'll have some moments, you'll have some triggers. When it's overwhelming your life, it's often called complicated grief. And it's when a person is not able to let go of the person who has passed. They're not able to get on with their lives. Maybe it's been 10 years and they haven't been able to clean out the person's room. They haven't faced the grief. They haven't allowed themselves to feel, or they have, but they just, for some reason, can't get over it. And I think that when it's that time, that you really need to seek some help. At hospice, we offer 13 months of bereavement care after a patient dies, because we know that the first year can be the worst, because that's when you're going to have the anniversary, the person's birthday, an anniversary. You're going to have Christmas, Easter, Hanukkah, whatever is coming up. Then the 1-year anniversary of the person's death. But the grief can certainly last longer than that, and I think seeking out bereavement support groups or a counselor is a good way to go to try to get through the grief if it's overwhelming your life.
Thank you, Caroline. Appreciate that. This is really a question for everybody. We talk about all these different kinds of grief and different kinds of experiences that people have had, and what are the main differences? And Carol, I'm going to go with you because I think you brought it up first. Versus the sudden loss of someone versus the long lived, I think you put it. How different are those experiences?
Well, if you're a worrywart like me, by nature, the long goodbyes are horrible because and I'm a planner too. So it's like, what am I going to do if this happens? What am I going to do if this happens? What happens when this happens? How am I going to make it all work? So it's just persistent. It's just a persistent presence in your life that you can't always shake. And the sudden one, you just roll with it. That was my experience. My father lived a good long life, so it was tragic to the family, but it was just different. It was just different. My mother was still there, so the support turned to being with her and helping her adjust. But the long goodbyes, they're draining. They're really draining. They zap your energy. As much as you try to grab your own passion and live.
I think Carol's internet connection has gotten unstable. Carl,
I definitely can speak to this. So, I think about, like I mentioned, my mom's experience where she basically had that cardiac event on Memorial Day, and she was not in good health. I mean, she was already on dialysis and had other significant health problems, but it's still that jarring event that you don't expect to happen that kind of way. And I remember in that experience feeling yeah, a sense of being overwhelmed. It was just, it's almost like hitting you like a ton of bricks. it just, it just comes over you. And those days were difficult. In fact, I remember I was in my second grad course at Buffalo State, graduate course, and I went to the professor. It was actually a counseling class, and I said to him, Dr. Cole, and I said, my mom just died. I don't think I can take the class. And he said, well, think about it and let me know, and just don't make the decision right now. Take a couple of days. And I ended up, taking the class, and that was my way of coping, was just to keep. I think, like even Carol said, keep working through it. My father, on the other hand, when he had his illness, like Carol said, it was very slow. It was very degenerative. It took time. But the thing I remember more than anything was stress. For me, it was stress. I'm an only child. I was the healthcare proxy. I was a power of attorney. In other words, all those decisions were left to me to manage, and it was overwhelming. It was the kind of thing where I had to do things that I don't know even I was necessarily prepared for. And certainly, even moving from one facility to another, all those things that happen. So it's sort of like, in many ways, people aren't even educated on what to do in these situations. There's no. I mean, there may be guides or whatever, but most people don't know, in some respect, what to do unless you've been through it. Is what I'm saying. So it's challenging.
It seems to me that guilt might be kind of permeating some of these issues, especially with the long goodbye issues, where that relief that could happen when it's finally over, maybe that could lead to some guilt feelings. Caroline, I'd like to hear what your advice might be for people who might be feeling that way.
Feeling the guilt.
Yeah.
I can speak to that from personal experience, because that's what happened when my father passed, that I had a sense of relief. And same with my mom too, because they had been battling their illnesses for a long time. And I did question, like, is this right for me to feel relief? But I also felt grief. It's not like I was like, oh, thank God they're gone. But if I would say that if someone does feel some guilt, to explore what that's about. Did they think, oh, I should have done more? Or, I gave up too soon. Or, obviously, I shouldn't feel this way, judging the way that they're feeling. So there's definitely some sense of guilt there. I know oftentimes in hospice, there will be caregivers who, they're not ready for their loved one to die. And they're sleeping all the time. He's not eating, he's not drinking, which is all natural part of the progression of dying. And so they try to force feed. Let's just give her some water. I'll give her some food. Is there anything you can do? And acceptance, and as I think Carl said, an education is a huge part of it. And I know in hospice we really try to educate people about what the natural progression is. It's not always textbook, but what can be expected and what's natural. And I know with my mom, I felt a little guilty after her stroke, thinking, well, maybe we should try to, get her some physical therapy. Maybe we should try to, build her up with protein shakes. But she was 93 years old. She had dementia. She was very weak. She was skin and bones. And we decided, let's just let nature take its course. If she wants to eat, she can eat. If she wants to get up, we'll get her up. If she doesn't want to, then we won't. And she died within a couple of weeks. And I didn't feel guilty about it, because I just let nature take its course. And I think with modern medicine, there's so much that can be done to keep someone alive. Whereas 100 years ago, it was more natural. Somebody was dying and you just went with it.
I think we're kind of getting into the area of stigma a little bit here, actually, with expectations of people. What are you expected to do? How are you expected to be? How are you expected to feel? And go ahead.
I can address that. I remember my husband was my husband was on life support in a coma they made me keep him on life support for 7 days before I could take him off life support. Those 7 days were awful. And the stigma that I felt of how I dealt with that, of how I felt some of the hospital staff disapproved. I didn't sit by his bedside. I would spend an hour a day with him, and then I would go about my business. And I don't think that sat well with a lot of people, but that's all I could do. And I'm of the belief that he wasn't there anyhow. He had made his choice to move on, and to sit there and watch his body struggle. And then when we did take him off life support, and something they don't tell you, it took him hours and hours and hours to pass. And again, I felt the stigma of, why aren't you at his bedside? And, instead I was in the waiting room. Again, I couldn't watch him. I couldn't sit there and watch his body die. And that was a stigma. Was it really related to mental health? Maybe not, but it was still stigma of trying to perform to meet other people's expectations. And some extra training, I think, could be used in those situations among some of the professional staff, that you have to let people deal with death on their own terms.
And the reality is that some people don't want to die with people around them.
Yes.
Some people wait until everybody's gone and then they die.
And
both of my parents died alone.
Yeah.
And I don't feel any guilt about it.
Yeah, that was a guilt I had, that I wasn't there when he took his last breath, but his brother was. And I felt badly with my mother too. I was not there. We all left the hospital for dinner. I was thinking we were going to come back, and circumstances were that we didn't go back. We were going to see her in the morning, and she passed during the night. And I felt bad that I wasn't with her, but I agree with you. I think some people don't want family around when they decide to pass.
And I'll just jump in and say that I've thought of that before. It brings me comfort, because my mom was a person who did live on her own terms her entire life. She was the one who called the shots. And in a sense, it's like you're saying, it makes sense that that was her decision. And she, whatever way it was strong-willed enough to say, this is how I want to, take that last, breath, and do it that way, perhaps. I mean, but I think the whole idea, though, of that, you're right, Carol, that stigma of you have to handle a certain way. Once again, the friend I was with, it was just saying how, like, even the last couple of days, there were he made some jokes, and I mean, he was just trying to lighten things up. Well, some family members weren't so fond of that. And so what's appropriate? What is appropriate? Caroline, what's appropriate?
Well, I'm going to tell you a story from because we also deal with children who have terminal illness. And there was a boy, and his mother was with him in the hospital. And she wanted to be with him, but he did not want her there when he died, because he knew that it would be too much for her. So he sent her home, go take care of, her little brother, and the father stayed. And then the boy died with just the father there. He was taking care of the mother by waiting to die until the mother was gone. The dying are amazing. It's amazing.
Really? It's interesting that you went there. It's like I was wondering to myself about children and handling this whole topic here with children. And we got a question that came through on the chat. What is the best approach to discuss death with a child, even if it is not someone they know personally, like, a news item like a school shooting or whenever they feel sadness and fear regarding hearing about other things? I wonder about, wakes and funerals and all these other things. Anybody have any opinions on discussing this topic with kids?
I would say, to be honest, I mean, obviously there's age appropriate ways to deal with it. Sometimes people talk about, just the way this butterfly in the sidewalk has died, we're all going to die, kind of thing. But the other thing is not to push them into anything, not to push them to go to a funeral, to respect their feelings, just as you would respect anybody's feelings. And the same advice that I gave before of listening, to be with them in their sadness and their fear, let them know that it's all normal feelings, and that it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to cry, and it's okay to go and play. And then, it doesn't mean you don't love the person any less.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case, like you're saying there, where, for instance, we've seen, of course, on TV, school shootings, whatever, I think the important thing is to let them know that they're safe. They're safe. And providing them with this knowledge that you're okay, you will be safe, wherever you go, you'll be protected. And it's hard, though. I think you talk about school. I was in a high school yesterday, and they have all these security measures, and it's sometimes difficult to feel that way. But as, I'll just say, parents, caregivers, we want to do whatever we can to help our children feel safe wherever they are.
Thanks, Carl. Another question just came through, kind of related. It says, can you feel grief even if you don't know the person? The world is a difficult place right now, and sometimes it takes the wind out of your sails. Is that grief? Is that the same?
Absolutely.
Yeah, collective trauma.
Or even if it's an individual. I mean, think about celebrities when they die. I know I'm a big music lover, and we've lost a lot of musical icons. And I remember, like, I just popped in my head, like when David Bowie died, or Prince, or Michael Jackson. I mean, we're talking about these icons. People just, oh yeah. I mean, just it hits people because you have a different association with that individual. But yeah, I think it's something that people, you do feel a sense of grief. You lost that person that, I've got a poster right here from Neil Peart, like you've got a person who you've really kind of grown up with that's now gone. So you have to process that.
I still grieve over the death of John Lennon. It's still very raw for me when the anniversary comes around.
And I think it all goes to change. I mean, when you lose something, whether it's a person, a relationship, a job, your life has changed. And how do you handle that change? And how do you move forward with that change? And can you? Some people can't. Some people can. Some people, the fear of change, something you have to deal with is, what does the future look like without this? And you've got to learn to manage change.
Yeah, and the grief can be the change. The grief can be loss of what could have been. It's not necessarily just, oh, the person has died, but oh, they had so much potential, or what, or even people grieve, that can't have children of, their own birth children. They grieve that. So there's so many layers and different things to grieve besides just death.
And let me just say, we haven't even touched on pets. Now you're laughing, but
I'm laughing because I've faced it and I'm facing it, and it's just more layers.
And of course, I have a dog that is, I guess you say, in midlife, but I don't even want to think about when that happens or when that will happen, and because you see when folks experience the loss of a beloved pet. I mean, our pets are talk about unconditional love. I mean, so that's a whole other aspect of grief and loss that people experience. That is something that it's sort of like you don't know what that's like until you've been through it. And I haven't really officially even been through it. I'm already feeling it in a way. Like, and I talk about anticipatory. Like, I don't want to go there. That's how I
Right.
feel.
I guess the point is all these are legitimate. And if you're feeling them, they're real, and that's okay. I mean, one thing I wanted to touch on was, of course, we just passed the anniversary of the tragic shooting at Tops, and experiencing that as a community. How is that the same or different for people?
I think there's a difference if it was in your, I mean, obviously it's tragic. But I think there's a difference between, is it your neighborhood that it happened in? Was it outside of your neighborhood? Is there people that you knew? Is it interrupting your routine? Is your sense of safety now compromised? The sense of belonging to this community. I know that when I was down at the scene after it happened last year, there was some resentment expressed that, all these people are coming in that have never been down here before. Right. Where were you before kind of thing. We can handle this ourselves. But that doesn't mean that other people's grief, aren't grieved by the events. It certainly was a tragedy.
You used the term resentment, Caroline, and it actually came up with another question. How do you work through feelings of resentment related to the belief that someone is responsible for another's death? That's a pretty big question. Anyone have any advice there?
That's a hard one, I think. And that's also different for different people. I mean, you will hear some people say, I as hard as I can forgive, but that's a tough one. I mean, especially if it's someone who's been taken in a way, perhaps that might be through violence, say, for instance, find a way to forgive or to deal with that resentment is really something I think that people are in many ways battling a lot. And so resentment towards, like what you're describing, for someone that's responsible for someone's death is like we said with us, it's very personal, and everybody handles it differently. Everybody has different reactions.
No doubt. We've talked about a lot of different kinds, and we've shared some personal stories, and very grateful for that. Was there anything in particular that any of you found surprising about the grief process that you've gone through?
This is kind of silly, so my husband had both physical and mental issues, and there were, we would go to the grocery store. We're on a limited budget, so every week the same things went into the grocery cart because that's what he needed to eat. And I found myself 6 months later still putting the same things in the grocery cart, and I finally realized I don't like this stuff. And I had to ask myself, well, what do I want? What do I want to eat? What do I like? And then as time went on, that happened over and over and over again in different areas. I had to find myself all over again, because as a caregiver, you're so focused, whether it's short term or long term or whatever, or even when my dad died, who am I now that I'm not his daughter? What freedoms did that allow me to express that I would curb myself because I know it would upset my dad, so that surprised me. The grocery store thing really surprised me. And I would consider that part of the grief process.
Well, thanks for that. Another question just came up, and it's really appropriate because we are, talking about stigma too. And of course, certain kinds of death bring with them various stigmas, the suicide or overdose. What role does that play in a person's ability to grieve when that has happened? Anyone have any opinions on that?
Well, technically my husband didn't kill himself. His actions, and he certainly could have, he certainly tried multiple times. And I've just had to come to terms with, you do what you can do, You protect them as much as you can protect them. But in the end, everyone has to choose when and if they're going to die. That's how I deal with it. Whether that's the right answer for anybody else, I can't say. But that's how I deal with it. He put himself there. So it was his choice, his journey. And I have to be at peace with that.
Okay. Any other thoughts from anyone else? Carl, anything to add to that?
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I've known in recent years, I've known of instances, or I've heard of instances, I've seen instances where someone has taken their life by suicide, and even in an obituary or a means of, say, the family recognizing publicly that that's perhaps what had transpired, but using that as a means of battling the stigma of mental illness or whatever, or even addiction or overdose, because that's ultimately, I think, a way of maybe even working through the healing process for the person or the family, that you don't have to hide it. I think, from my understanding, my belief is when you hold things in and you hide them, they fester, they grow, and they make things even worse. So I believe personally, and as hard as it is, and it's a very difficult thing to do, but to acknowledge it, you're acknowledging it. You're not fighting it. And so for me, being able to talk about it is a big thing.
And also, what comes to mind for me is, the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief, and a person who is dealing with someone, any kind of death, but also especially like an overdose or a suicide, could be very, very angry. Could be very. I don't want to know if I want to use the word accepting, but kind of resigned, like, well, that like you were talking, Carol, like, well, this is the path that they chose. And so to hopefully, the stigma of people thinking that you should feel a certain way because this happened this way, and you might not be in the box that people think that you should be in terms of the way that you're dealing with it. And of course, those feelings, those stages can jump all over the place. And there's no shame in that.
And it can last for years. You think you're fine, and then something will trigger you. And my trigger the other day was listening to the poor mother of the Louisville shooter. And to hear her, I mean, I'm pretty media savvy. I don't get, I'm pretty jaded with everything I hear. I know how stuff is edited, all that. But I listened to this poor woman and I felt every word because I had been in her shoes. I had someone who suffered. I got them the help. I mean, it just, I cried for a half hour, and it was like, well, why? Well, because it triggered me. I thought I was over all that, but apparently I weren't. So I guess my advice to other people is don't beat yourself up if 8 years from now something triggers you, because it just might.
That's really quite profound, Carol. This has been such a great conversation, and I appreciate all of you for your courage and your willingness to continue to talk, which is exactly what we need to do. I feel like we just scratched the surface, but our hour is about to end. As a reminder to our audience, we need you to take the pledge to end stigma by going to our website, letstalkstigma.org. If your organization would like to join us in our cause, there's information on the website as well. Just click on the members tab to find out how. Together, we can reduce stigma and create an environment of support where help seeking and help giving are the norm. Once again, I'd like to thank our panelists, Caroline Fulkerson, Carol Doggett, and Carl Shallowhorn. I'd also like to thank everyone behind the scenes, Mike Telesco from Telesco Creative Group for his vision and technical support, and Karen Karaszewski from KKPR Buffalo for her support as well. We'll be taking a brief hiatus, but we hope you join us next time we get together for our next Facebook Live. Thank you again, panelists. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. So on behalf of the Erie County Anti-Stigma Coalition, until next time, I'm Matt Smith. Stand up to stigma, and good luck on your wellness journey.